The whole concept for this panel was hatched earlier in the year. And I was giving some thought to all the uncertainty in policy and transportation and government. And there was, just in general, I'd say a little bit of a dispirited kind of vibe, in our industry and in our workspace. And I thought, there's a lot of uncertainty at the federal level, but we got to remind ourselves that as Americans, this is a very apolitical comment, by the way, just as Americans, we are joiners. Just look at our history. We are joiners and we are builders, and we figure stuff out oftentimes in periods of challenging circumstances. We get down at the local level and we figure stuff out in novel and creative ways, and we continue to change for the good. And this whole concept is built around the idea of listening to the stories of people who have done that. They've actualized exactly what I'm talking about, the laboratories of democracy that Brandeis talked about, which makes America a great place. They're from all over the country. I'll let them introduce themselves, do different things, but that's the common thread. So having set the stage, we're going to do introductions, and then I'm going to start asking them some questions. Be ready to ask a question if you want to raise your hand or prompt one of the folks that are helping us out. We can even introduce some questions midstream here. But if you're a little shy, we can do that at the end, kind of have you walk up and, stand and deliver. Leif Dormsjo is my name. I am a executive vice president at a firm called Redgate, based in Boston, but I run our DC office. We also have a presence in the Research Triangle, and we advise governments, universities, investors around real estate, the real focus on transit-oriented development. So we're really focused on urban projects and complicated projects that are enhancements to communities. Prior to that, I was in government for about 20 years in DC and Maryland. So I'm going to let the rest of the group introduce themselves, and then we're going to get to their storytelling.
Hi, I'm Rachelle Giles. I'm the executive director of Friends of Transit out of Phoenix, Arizona. And I also work for a firm called Goodman, Schwartz Public Affairs. I'm our vice president of local government relations and nonprofit association management.
Hi all, I'm Kirk Hovenkotter. I'm the executive director of Transportation Choices Coalition. We are Washington State's nonprofit advocate for safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation. And thrilled to be here on this panel today.
Good morning all. Sean Massey, New Jersey Transit. First, let me just offer as a comment, how did we get scheduled after that plenary session? You almost lost me. I was prepared to run through a wall back to New Jersey to go crush it, with courage and conviction. But I said, wait a second, I've got obligations here. So I lead New Jersey Transit's transit-oriented development division. So we're charged with advancing priority development initiatives centered around our transportation facilities. Thrilled to be here.
Thanks. My name is Andrew Brennan. I'm a vice president at HNTB. We're a national transportation development firm working in most major cities in the country. Prior to that, I spent a very long and very happy career at the MBTA, which is the transit agency in Boston, where I was a senior management person running our environmental department. So I dealt with everything that the MBTA built or that anybody near us was trying to build. So I just have a long set of experience in how transit fits into a community.
Excellent, excellent. So Rachelle, I'm going to start with you. The kind of arc of the questions that I'm going to ask the group here kind of spools out similarly. I'm going to ask you to kind of set the stage for the dilemma that your organization was looking to address. Like, what's the origin story of the Friends of Transit? And if you could also not just talk about the organizational history and kind of what they were trying to address, but like what brought you into the organization in terms of playing a role.
Thanks. So just want to say really happy to see so many people in the audience. I hope we have some Arizonans in here today. But woo, yay! Just one. Thanks, just one Arizona in the back. So Friends of Transit is a 501c3 organization, and we originated our superhero origin story, which is how I took this when we started planning the panel, is that Phoenix tried and failed to pass the transit initiative in the 1990s a couple of times. And in 2001, Phoenix did finally pass its T2000 or Transportation 2000 plan. And that was a 0.4% sales tax to go toward multimodal transportation in the city of Phoenix. Smartly, the mayor at the time, Skip Rimza, and my predecessor, David Schwartz, who worked for Mr. Rimza, decided that society, as we all know, is a bit fickle. And so from the time that we managed to get T2000 passed, and the time where they would start actually doing work related to the project, particularly our initial light rail segment down Central Avenue, which, if anyone's been to Phoenix, is sort of the main drag, that people were probably going to be pretty angry when we started to rip up Central Avenue and do utility work, because they would have forgotten that they perhaps voted for such a project to take place. And really, amazingly, David and Skip said, that we need to take this and turn it into something that spans wider than just getting people from point A to point B. We need to tie this directly to business. We need to tie it to economics. We need to make sure that people understand that in order for Phoenix to grow the way that it is capable of, we need a well-balanced regional transportation plan, and that only comes together if Phoenix starts the process. And so Friends of Transit was really the brainchild of Skip and David coming together and saying, let's bring, about 40 business leaders in the community of all different sectors together to address the fact that we need an organization to do informational outreach when we start ripping up Central Avenue mainly. And it worked. And we're here almost 25 years later. And we've adapted throughout the years to meet, the many challenges that Phoenix has seen. We have been working pretty much the entire time to pass various transportation initiatives, culminating, I would say just last year in the passage of our regional Prop 479, which was a really hard fought battle. For the one Arizonan, we're trauma bonded, I'm sure, by the journey that was to get it passed, even though, transit remains largely very popular. So I'll stop there because I know we have so many more panelists to get to, but that's Friends of Transit's origin story. And I think that, the takeaway here is that some really smart people well before my time came up with the tie to business and to economics, and that message has really resonated with the population from Arizona over the years, and that's why Friends of Transit continues to be successful and be able to adapt now almost 25 years later.
Excellent, excellent. And maybe just a little bit about what fires you up personally, and what was the attraction for the role to that you're in.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that part. Lots to unpack with Friends of Transit, but so I have been supporting Friends of Transit for 12 years. As I mentioned, my predecessor, David Schwartz, who's the Schwartz of Goodman Schwartz, the firm I work for, was the executive director prior to me. And when in talking about Friends of Transit, I used to be able to do a really cute thing where David would tell the story that I just did, and he would say, okay, and in 1997, this failed. And I'd be like, and I was in 5th grade. And so anybody who's not a millennial here will think that's really charming. But now I get to I get to talk about Friends of Transit because I have been supporting the group for 12 years. I do consider myself in Arizona now. I've coming up on my 13th year, and while I had exposure to transit transportation prior to moving to Arizona, I really got a full face of it when I started, my professional career in Phoenix, working for the late Councilwoman Thelda Williams, who is largely considered, I'd say, the grandmother of transit, in particular, a visionary for Phoenix Light Rail, and worked, the entirety of her career to further transit and transportation initiatives. And so after my stint with her and going back to the firm and continuing my work with Friends of Transit, I got to be a part of the organization going through a major shift and change, and got to add in my very, as David would say often, I moved a lot of his cheese, and he thankfully let me, and it worked. And so we went from a group that was largely doing business assistance to fitting into the plethora of other groups doing similar things. We have a transit association. We've got Women in Transportation Seminar, WTS. We've got COMTO. We've got a multi-mobility pedestrian focus group. We've got multiple bike advocacy groups. And so we really had to adapt and find a way to be innovative and inspirational. And that's, I think, what was lacking at the time, as folks really wanted that inspiration instead of, technicality or anything else that was being offered. Those things have a place, but we really needed to provide, just some new energy, and that's what we did. And I would say that it's gone well and it's worked. So it was really a no-brainer for me, I guess, to step into David's role when he decided to enter retirement not too long ago. And so I'm really happy to be kind of at another turning point for the organization where we're adapting.
Cool. That's great context and really like cool personal stuff. Kirk, speaking of cool personal stuff, when I talked to Kirk the first time and met him, immediately getting into the energy and focus that he's bringing to his organization, which I would love to hear a little bit more about transportation choices, how you ended up there, have the origin story, not just of the coalition, but yourself, because you've been doing this in multiple roles in the Northwest in terms of activating people. During our call, very polite, Kirk's talking to me, and he's like, "Look, man, I think we got it. I think we got it to connect. Like, I got to get back in the game right now. I got a referendum. I'm pushing hard." He's like in total campaign mode. I'm like, "Okay, go, go, go!" And hung up, and I was like, "Yes, live wire. This guy is a live wire." And Sean Massey is like a half the energy of Kirk that he brings.
Good morning, everyone.
And yeah, very sedate. So it's going to there's going to be kind of a little bit of a drop off as we move down the line here. I just wanted to presage that a little bit, Kirk.
Leif, when you put it that way, I'd really sound rude. But thank you so much for having me here. I was that annoying millennial. I got my start in this work wearing a cardboard light rail vehicle costume on University of Washington campus in 2008, trying to get students to register to vote and vote for Mass Transit Now, which was our light rail ballot measure in 2008 that extended Sound Transit light rail. Yes, that deserves some applause. To expand, not for me, but for light rail. It was our ballot measure campaign to expand light rail north to Linwood, south to Federal Way, and east to Bellevue and Redmond. And I get goosebumps being in this role today as these extensions open. It's opening to Federal Way on December 6th, and early next year, it will cross Lake Washington, the first light rail to cross a floating bridge in the world, and that will be the completion of that ballot measure from 2008. But I'm thrilled to be in this role today at Transportation Choices Coalition, which for 34 years has been a coalition of business, labor, transit agencies, transit riders, and elected leaders, all beating the drum for investments in transit and safe walks to transit. We do a lot of work in the state legislature. We organize transit riders across Washington state, but we're most known for winning those ballot measure campaigns, as I talked about. when I was that annoying millennial in 2008. It was the executive director of this organization at the time who I just thought were the coolest people in the world. I was really nerdy back then. It was an organization that led the ballot measure campaigns in 2016, that campaign in 2008, and in 1996, that expanded light rail across the region. And that's what we're most known for, but Transportation Choices Coalition also leads these ballot measure campaigns for small transit agencies across the state, like we're doing one right now for Ellensburg Transit, that I had to jump off that call to go help out on. But we also do big street campaigns like the Seattle Transportation Levy, a $1.55 billion investment that we helped lead the successful campaign for last November, which I'm excited to dig into a little bit more with this panel.
Perfect, perfect. Sean, sorry to kind of trample on your introduction there, but Sean, I can do that because I've known Sean for 20 plus years, and we have a great bond. Your origin story at New Jersey Transit, I think, is kind of another variant of what we're talking about here. Help describe for us kind of what it's been like working in the densest state in the union, right, leading up their TOD real estate business line at New Jersey Transit, kind of prior to, I think, the monumental achievements that you brought forward in two great projects, Metro Park and Hoboken Ferry Terminal. There's kind of I see it as like a before those projects and after, and what was that challenge in terms of the environment and the characteristics of trying to get things done in New Jersey leading up to that? Like and because you've been going at this for quite some time, my friend.
Sure, and let me just say there will be consequences to that behavior, Leif. Just so the record reflects that. But I'll let it
filmed,
I'll let it slide. It is being recorded. That's fair. Yeah. So I would say I've been very fortunate to do project-based work. I find it very rewarding where you're charged with delivering some initiative from step A to step Z, and you get numerous setbacks along the way. It goes without saying that's part of the fun. What makes it so rewarding. But I think the reason that you're able to have successful projects like one, say, at a Hoboken terminal, which is a multimodal facility that directly connects to New York City, where you've got all modes of transportation connecting there at the facility, is that communities like Hoboken, also a community like Woodbridge, where Metro Park is located, they're able to see, feel, and touch the successes that have been had elsewhere, right? I think and this is my first time here at this conference, but I'm sure if you were to go back in time and you were talking about the debates that communities are having about these projects and the school children, the traffic, and you know the usual talking points that will come out at every turn, but what we've seen is that communities are seeing just that you're building pretty cool places, and folks are waking up, if they haven't already, to say, well, we want that, and we want that in our town, not only because it's something that these crazy millennials, right, you gave yourself away, these crazy millennials, Gen Xers, the boomers down at the end, it doesn't matter what generation, what, no, maybe, no, you teed it up, universally, everybody enjoys these spaces, right? And so when elected officials and those that are charged with considering how we evolve our spaces over time, when they see that their constituents are like, hey, we really like this and we want more of it, whether it's for aging parents, we're seeing a lot of that in the communities that we're building around our facilities, millennials or other younger generations that are looking for a place to live coming out of school. That really was the jumping off point and a starting point for folks buying into the fact that we've got to prioritize these projects. We've got to directly connect housing choices on top of transportation. It's in the interest of the agencies, just in the sense that where we have land offerings, we can make a few bucks in non-fare bucks revenues to support our operations, put those monies back into stations and the facilities themselves. And host communities are enjoying ratables and activating properties that otherwise were not on the tax rolls. So there's like a multiplier of benefits that factor. And I think as communities have seen the impact and the benefits that projects will help foster in their communities, they're like, yeah, we want more of that. challenges, challenges as they are, we still want to work through those issues because we see that you can be a good faith partner, you can mitigate for them. There are creative solutions out there, founded on best practices that many in this room have helped foster over the last years, so that you can tee them up for implementation. So that's kind of what's helped. It's not just the work we're doing in the trenches ourselves, it's being able to look out across the country and say, hey, look, you can get a little bit of this if you're interested and want to play ball.
I think the interesting parallel between New Jersey and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is really kind of worth delving into a little bit. I mean, two East Coast states, very strong home rule. We talked when we were getting ready for the panel, about just kind of a lot of, I think, almost like natural NIMBYism around housing. A lot of maybe not necessarily the strongest constituencies for transit investments once you get out of kind of the greater Boston area or get out of the greater New York or Philadelphia areas. But in Massachusetts, I mean, incredibly, Andrew, if you could kind of set the stage for what Massachusetts and the debate around transit and investment and land use was like before the MBTA's Community Act, which is 2021, I believe. Like, set the stage for that, then we'll get into like what it actually does. And then I think at that point we've all kind of been able to characterize that existing landscape that you guys all kind of came into as practitioners, and we can get into a little bit more detail about like the achievements and challenges of these measures and and some of these initiatives. But MBTA Communities Act, I think, is a really profoundly important local innovation. It's like a kind of textbook what we're talking about in terms of a laboratory of democratic action.
So I came into the MBTA at a really interesting point in time, and I think I came in when you were in like second grade, so I'm not going to tell you exactly when, but it was right at the time when Massachusetts was building the so-called Big Dig project, or the Central Artery Third Harbor Tunnel project, and with it was a massive portfolio of transit projects that needed to be built to offset the anticipated or perceived impacts of the Central Artery. And it was interesting, it's just such a sea shift, because when I came in, everything was about, this has to be about vehicle miles traveled and reducing auto vehicle miles traveled, measured by, I commute into Boston and I commute home. And so every project was this suburban-based, extend to a community that's somewhat far afield. All good, but I think over time they realized like maybe just commuters is not really the best or most efficient market to be chasing here. There has to be something different. And so there was just an evolution over time about maybe we should be thinking about like how transit supports land use, right? And how transit, yes, automobile travel, yes, congestion, but also really being part of a well thought out land use system. And so there was just a major sea change that then I think to go into what you were asking about, Leif, is this what we call the MBTA Communities Act, which is I think a very forward-thinking approach to how they're doing it, and it is this sort of laboratory idea that the MBTA its service district is about 175 cities and towns, and it's defined as a place that they send service to or a town adjacent, right? So if you're in one of those definitions, you are an MBTA community. And it requires now that you have a certain amount of area, a zoning plan set aside for high density, and high density is not as high as some people would want, but communities, an area set aside for this development that is zoned as right. So I don't need to get a zoning reform to build that housing. I don't need to get a special permit. I have the right to build in this. And what's interesting about it is I think they did a good job in that, it is not one size fits all. It is set up it takes into consideration how much transit you have in the community, how much affordable housing or density you currently have, and it sort of brackets you or calculates you in. And you have to create, the municipality, have to create a zoning plan for this area that would provide multi-unit housing to support families, that a family-oriented multi-unit housing. And I think it's something like, it has to support, I think, 15 units per acre or something like that. So, I mean, some of the criticism is like, that's not really high enough. Some of the fear, however, was we're going to be getting these like huge multi-story buildings, and it's somewhere in the middle, right? But what's interesting about it is the stick is massive. If you are a community that does not create one of these plans on time, you lose most of your state grant programs. So you lose your roadway intersection improvement plan. You lose your bike path money. You lose your, resiliency money. Any kind of like infrastructure grants that you're getting from the state, you lose. And some of the communities have really fought it, like out of the fear of, we're going to become downtown Boston. Well, you're not. So they've refused to put in plans and have now actually started to lose that money. And, we're talking for some relatively small communities, millions of dollars. These are millions of dollars of grants that they really wanted that they're not going to get. And it includes, now what's great, I think, is one of the criteria to get on the tip, to get your project to get federal funding, the consideration is going to be like, do you have this plan in place? So not only are you using state money, but you're losing access and competition for the federal money too. So the stick is massive. And we're still seeing a fair amount of resistance from some communities, but for the most part, of the 175, some communities have yet to hit their deadline for submitting, the very small ones, but the big ones, there's a fairly high rate of communities putting in plans and doing it. There is a concern about what does it look like. There's complaints that there's no affordable housing requirement in these. Like, just you have to build this housing. It doesn't require it to be affordable. But each municipality typically has their own requirements, so it comes in through a different door. And there's also no requirement that the stuff actually get built. It's just that you have the zoning laid out. But I think the thinking is that if you take away things like zoning changes and needing a special permit and going in front of, we talk about local, but going in front of town meeting, which is a Massachusetts thing, comes from the Puritans. It's an incredibly difficult way to run a community, but it's what we do. To go in front of town meeting to try to get a project approved is too much. So I think the thing is, like, if you just take away those barriers for a housing developer, they'll jump in and take up the space. So it's this amazing, I think, very forward-thinking approach to zoning with probably the biggest stick I've ever seen from government.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the history of the MBTA Communities Act and what Andrew's talking about, it's definitely worth taking a close look. It's a very I think profound piece of legislation, and then just also how it's been protected by the state through litigation, and it's still unsettled, but it appears to be standing up in the face of challenge. Yeah.
I actually think it's settled, right? One community to the south of Boston went, and the Attorney General said, we're going to cut off your money because you don't have a plan in place. They sued over that, and it went to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court stood up the act. There were some tweaks that had to be done to how the regs were done, but those were fixable things. But I think it's pretty much settled now that towns have to do this, and not doing it comes with a big penalty.
So if we could just now segue into this kind of the second round of questions, where I really would like each of you to, in your own way, your own voice, kind of contribute to this idea of the catalyst for change and investment in communities and transit in particular, and kind of how you're activating or sustaining your coalitions, like to do things that are transformative. And so, Sean, with your program, I mean, really, an interesting contrast to what Andrew just talked about, and you in your prior comments, like, you're not trying to, as a state, and although Governor Murphy has done some things, with regard to affordable housing that have really, been reforms, and so he's had a great track record there. Your approach, the New Jersey approach and model, has been a little bit more towards carrots, to bring people together, showcase projects, give them something to get excited about and get engaged with. Can you maybe get into a little bit more detail about how that operates kind of at the stakeholder level, either Hoboken, because you got so many different interests like focused in on that project. How do you get those folks to rally around that catalytic project? And how does it translate into actual support? Because you've got a ton of support for that project over the years.
Well, I think part of it was, and Hoboken Terminal was constructed in the early 1900s, so just the sheer fact that if we did not do something, we ran the risk that it would fall into the river. That was a starting point for discussions, obviously. So when we talk about
Good scare tactic.
yeah,
I like
right.
that.
Just
Good.
I don't have the same sticks that Andrew has, which is it's going to fall in. It's going to fall in. But the idea that there was underinvestment, we'll frame it that way. There was underinvestment in this otherwise, beautiful asset directly on the river with all the modes of transportation and those various connections, as I mentioned at the outset. I think you'd have to be blind or willfully obtuse to not recognize that some meaningful sort of investment was warranted. So it was a coalition probably not unlike coalitions you'd see forming across the country when there's a clear need demonstrated and action has to be taken. So the unions were at the forefront, housing advocates were there, transportation supporters were there. New Jersey Transit itself advocating for investment in these key infrastructure components, and as you highlighted, Leif, the governor and legislature warrant a good amount of credit for recognizing that, look, for us to better connect our people to jobs, opportunity, education, all the good things that we know that transportation affords us as a people, that we've got to invest in these assets, right? So whether it was setting aside money for a Hoboken terminal, which they have, Walter Rand Transportation Center down in Camden, New Jersey, Newark Penn Station. I don't know if folks have traveled through the Northeast Quarter Line. That's another beautiful facility where we've programmed a good amount of money the state has to reinvest in the asset. So I think it was shared ownership of the challenge and folks being willing to put resources to it. And then just diligently work through the various project considerations that come up when you're working with these older assets, right? These are not new facilities. They didn't just come online in the 1970s, so to speak. So you've got to be very thoughtful. Hoboken Terminals, it's a historic place. It's on the National Registry, so that's a real challenge that we're working through. Same at a number of our other facilities that we're investing dollars in. So I think the governor, the legislature, they deserve a large amount of the credit, and then the host communities, their willingness to say, hey, this is going to help us meet affordable housing needs in our communities, right? We don't have a place to live for a good number of our folks in our communities, and we can help meet that obligation. I think the stars aligned in a pretty compelling way. That forced folks into action. I think that's the genesis for how you got to that tipping point where we're moving on these projects.
Kirk, can you talk a bit about, kind of an extension of the same question, sustaining the coalition? You guys have been at this for so long, but there's bound to be critics, right? There's bound to be folks who have said, okay, you didn't even fulfill the promise of move Seattle from 2015. We wanted more, and we didn't get all the light rail lines that we wanted and that were pledged. We didn't get all the bike amenities. We didn't get all those things. Now you're asking us to rally around, transit investment again. How do you communicate to both skeptics and supporters? How do you keep that energy focused on, the next catalytic part of what you guys are trying to do from an investment perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. And luckily, we have something that happens twice a day that gets people thinking about these issues. And it's our traffic. Every morning commute, every afternoon commute, people are stuck in traffic in a really fast-growing city. And I have to highlight that last point. The levy that we passed in 2024, it was the levy before it was passed in 2015. 50% of the people who live in Seattle today were not here in 2015. This election that we had in November 2024 was the first time so many of those people who had moved to Seattle got the chance to vote to make their commute better, their trip to the hospital better, or to a doctor's appointment, their school pickup and drop off trip better. And they were excited to vote for this. 66% of our city voted yes to raise their taxes to fund these investments. And it's because they see what transit can do for them, how it can make their life better, and really how it can address one of the most pressing issues in our city, which is affordability. AAA Washington identifies that car ownership, the average cost of it each year, is $12,000 a year. The quickest way we could put $12,000 back into a Seattleite's pocket was to give them the opportunity to get around with one fewer car or without a car. And the way we were going to do that is by making our streets, trails, and transit prioritize people walking, biking, and rolling first.
Cool. That's a great answer. And then Rachelle, we talked before a bit about how your coalition in Phoenix has evolved over time as well, and the investment priorities that have been included in your T20 or T50. Am I right?
T2050.
T2050. I got to get a lot of numbers to keep in
So
mind.
many numbers.
That is different than the prior initiative. But can you speak to kind of how the stakeholder coalition has evolved? How, even to Kirk's point, the whole constituency of Phoenix has changed over the past 15 years in a rapidly growing environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, a similar situation, a faster growing city and Maricopa County is actually still the fastest growing county in the United States, has been for several years. So the population of Phoenix from when I landed in 2012, 2013 has skyrocketed. And so I want to back up just a little bit because there are a lot of numbers and initiatives that we've gone through, which means for Friends of Transit and our other groups, we've been advocating for initiatives almost the entire time and before I started supporting the group. So we, in 2001 had the passage of Phoenix's T2000. See, I'm even messing it up now. And that was really the backbone for some of the enhancements and changes to our transportation system in the Phoenix metro area and added the component of light rail. In 2004, Maricopa County, which is the county that Phoenix sits in, passed its Prop 400, and that levied a half-cent sales tax that also supported regional transportation development. Then, as you mentioned, in 2014, we had re-upped T2000 to be T2050. And that I'll talk a little bit more in detail about because it did make some changes from the original T2000 plan. We also then had an anti-light rail proposition in 2019. Very confusing for everyone. It failed, thankfully. And we then had to move right into re-upping Prop 400 as Prop 479, which we got through to the ballot. Then it was vetoed by the governor, and then we had to go back to the legislature. And I'll save you all the details of why that all had to take place. But Friends of Transit has been lucky that we have been the group that is known as convening the convener. So we're Friends of Friends. We're the group that brings everyone together. We largely do education. And so that starts with arming our advocates and helping them go to their audiences and expand the message. And the message, thankfully, because we always start with polling, as as David and I came from a campaign background, the message was relatively easy. All we had to do was simply tell the truth. You like transit, you want transit, we're doing transit, this does this transit, and all of these initiatives have passed very handily. Our anti-light rail measure was defeated very handily. And so that is what Friends of Transit largely has been doing for the last 25 years is education. And so we've just had to adapt as transit's gotten more popular and opponents have gotten more creative in how they go and do things. Now, I'll very quickly get into T2050 because I think it's important to recognize that a lot of angst had built up in Phoenix around the condition of our roads and streets. And I know this is a transit conference, but I think it's very important to note that, Friends of Transit has always been based around a balanced regional transportation plan because Phoenix and its metro is so large geographically that has to include maintaining roads and freeways. There's no other way to do it. And certainly folks right now are still dependent on cars to get around. We had, when I was in council, a council member who was right down the hall who essentially anthropomorphized potholes. And so you would think, I came to Phoenix and you would think that potholes were like reaching out and pulling people in and destroying cars. And I was like, this is so ridiculous. Like, how are people buying into this? And then I drove into one. And I was like, wow, she is evil. And that pothole at Bethany Home and 16th is the real deal. And then I understood why people were resonating with this, this message of like, Phoenix is ignoring you, the person who has to drive on these roads. We're a dilapidated city. And it was so frustrating because it wasn't the full picture, but it did resonate with people. And so when T2050 came to be, smartly, those who were part of the planning process knew that streets and infrastructure, road infrastructure had to be addressed. And it was included as a larger percentage. And so one thing, and I know I'll be able to expand on this a little bit more later, but one thing that people really could get behind is improving that infrastructure. And transit advocates could also get behind in improving that infrastructure. We have the opportunity to do different things like enhance our bike lanes, protect our bike lanes, do beautification, enhance, ADA infrastructure, and add to our transit system to boot. So a big difference in T2050 was that not only did it extend the time frame of the sales tax, it also bumped it up from 0.4% to 0.7%, and created a longer runway for projects.
Yeah, I do want to get into that because, in our prior discussion, it was really fascinating for me to see that some of the predictions associated with T2050 around, sales revenue generation were actually conservative relative to how you've performed economically, which is, I think, probably the one example that I've seen of an economist, essentially underestimating kind of positive attributes of a piece of legislation. They tend to kind of over-project. That kind of conversation around the regional dynamics and then the evolution of the coalition, turns me back to Andrew and the greater Boston area. As great Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local, right? So you were at the MBTA when the legislation was adopted. And so this is kind of a different circumstance. We've got two kind of outside players here, right, who are in the advocacy world, trying to influence the government behemoth, and then we've got, these two government types who are inside, the organism of government, but also equally interested in progress and change and reform and making people's lives better. But that initiative wasn't like, how did the MBTA fit into the coalition as that act was being adopted? Because it wasn't really directly your thing, right? But
Not at all.
right. And Boston, I think what you would think would be is the hub. It is referred to as the hub, but the act doesn't even apply to Boston, I don't think, right?
Correct.
Okay, so what politically, because we're all politically motivated and interested here, like what was the political story behind the act from your vantage point?
So there was it was weird because there was a lot that was going on, but then when it actually came into place, the reaction by the public, like, wait, what is this? I've never heard of this before. So it was bizarre to me that, like, we spent so much time talking about it and preparing for it and providing information to stakeholders and legislators about, because the question for the MBTA was, we're not building the housing. Some of it will be like adjacent to our property, but it can be up to a half a mile away. So a lot of it, we have no skin in the game there. But the question was, can the MBTA actually sustain this? Like, can you actually meet the ridership demands that are associated with it? So we spent a lot of time supporting coalitions to say, like, yes, here's, this is not going to overburden us. Here's why we can do it in any specific place. But it was just an interesting process of us sort of, by definition, we were supposed to sort of sit on the sidelines, right? We were not an active player. This was about advocates, the MPOs, legislators, people like that who were going to make this thing work. And we were just supposed to be like answering questions when they asked them. Because we have somewhat of a legislative prohibition about getting involved in a political dialogue like that, which is odd because we're the government. So we were providing that information, but just sitting and watching how advocates worked was just the most fascinating part. I was telling somebody the other day, like, I love being a consultant, I love working at HNTB, but I really miss being involved with like real people who do real stuff. I mean, my clients work with advocates and work with communities, but I don't anymore. And I miss that part of it because there's an energy and a brilliance that comes out of, these small table conversations that people have about what's happening in my neighborhood and how to make that better. And I just don't get to do that on a day-to-day basis anymore. So I miss that. And I really respect people that get to do that every day. You're very fortunate to have that. So it was an interesting, it affects, like I said, 175 cities and towns. It's probably, I'm going to guess, probably those 175 cities and towns probably reflect, I'm going to say 75% of the population of Massachusetts, right? Anything outside of that is that part of the state that I don't really know what goes on out west. It's like there's hardly anybody out there. So the population of Massachusetts is in that 175. And there was, to your point, a lot of, Boston does not have to comply with this law for a number of weird other reasons that make sense. They're not exempt, but it just doesn't apply to them. But, the interesting part of it was the city of Boston, up until that point, had created something like 50% of all of the new units in the area. The city of Boston had created something like 75% of all of the legally binding affordable housing in the area. So it doesn't apply to Boston, but the city of Boston has stepped up. Like they've taken on all of the burden of building this up, which was part of the rationale. Like we have to spread this out. Like it has to go out into communities that have not had to step up and do anything. The communities that are fighting it have, I think, terrible histories of providing affordable housing and providing dense housing. So it was really about like we can't keep this burden on the city of Boston as much as we have been. They're not exempt, to be really clear. It just the way their legislative mandate is set up, it just doesn't fit. They don't fit into those categories. But that's been one of the gripes. It's probably the biggest gripe is, these small cities and towns are like, wait, Boston doesn't have to do this, but we, the town of Sherburne or some little tiny town, we have to do it. There's a perceived inequity to that I think is hard to get over.
Great, that's fascinating stuff. Do you want to comment on that? Go ahead.
Yeah, Leif, I think to that comment about getting to work with, real people, and I was so
people who do things.
I was so thrilled to be a part of this panel because of this title, Laboratories of Democracy. So I want to tell a story going back to November 2024, right after we had spent about a year and a half working on this campaign to pass the Seattle Transportation Levy, working for about a year on the C3 side of it, supporting the C4 side of it. And so we had won this election, but it was November 2024. It was a very dispiriting election. It was an extremely tough time. It was very uncertain where we were going to go. And we had this victory, but we were really, really depressed. And we had one event coming up the weekend after that election. It was a Transportation Advocacy 101 with a group called Youth for Equitable Streets. These are 18 to 21-year-olds in Seattle who want to learn more about how to be an advocate for better streets, trails, and transit in their communities. And so that Saturday after the election, we got to do a training with them for about 3 hours at the Seattle Central Library on a cold, rainy Saturday after the election when we were expecting just everyone to be dispirited. And to have 50 youth in that room ready to get to work, ready to organize, ready to learn how to testify, how to make transit better in their community was the thing that got me back in the game, got me back doing this work after an extremely tough election. And if you're interested in learning more about our Transportation Advocacy 101s, we do a lot of them in rural communities across Washington State. You should reach out to our Education Engagement Manager, Brennan, who's in the audience, who can share more about these events. And really, it's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, is seeing how much real people want to get involved in shaping their communities.
Great, that's awesome. Rachelle, can you talk, like, kind of play off that a little bit? Like, what are some of the things that you and your organization are currently like keying in on? Given that you've provided a lot of context for how we've kind of gotten to where, or you've gotten to where you are, can you speak a little bit to that point of like what's now on the horizon?
Of course, yeah, I love that story. I think that, young people, being an annoying millennial, I'm leaning hard into this. I think that the power of young energy to come in and really provide inspiration without the barriers that we all have now, being a little bit further into our careers, is really truly amazing. And I think I'll talk a little, use this opportunity to talk a little bit about a program that we put together about 10 years ago now, but we, had talked a lot about how do we, in addition to the scholarships and the outreach that we do to community groups that don't necessarily, may not see the tie to transit and transportation, public health or land development in some cases, these groups that could be friends of transit but may need some help to understand why it ties in. In addition to doing that outreach and getting them to come to our events and our annual conference and those things that leave our members of Friends of Transit, inspired and engaged, what else can we do? And something that was missing was how do we introduce students who are, in college at that level to transit and transportation if they've literally never considered a career in it. And so we came up with our student contest, which we did for many years up until the pandemic at our annual conference. And what we did was we polled, our membership and said, what's a problem that we could give students to solve? And we came up with some problems that were affecting the metro area. We gave it to, as a prompt, we offered a cash prize, which is very popular with college kids. And we ended up turning this program into something that, is honestly truly amazing. It's one of sort of the high points of my entire career. But we've had, probably close to 50 students come through. They come in, they solve a problem. We encourage them to come in, be interdisciplinary. They go through the initial process. They come, if they make the finals, they speak at our conference in front of transit leaders from all over the metro area. We have an 85% retention rate in bringing these young people in and keeping them in. So they land internships, initial, first time jobs, Some of them are in leadership positions now, which is amazing, and we're using those folks to figure out what the next version, the next iteration of this program is. So how do we keep this going in a creative way that keeps people engaged and helps people get to where they are at now, and then how do we turn them into the next generation of leaders? So we're doing a lot of other things, but I think just in terms of something that we didn't know if it would work, and it really has. I think that engaging that youth and creating a pipeline, and maybe more of a non-traditional way can really pay dividends in the long end, because here we are a decade later with now the initial cohort of our student contest and leadership positions in transit, a career that they never considered prior to being exposed to our contest and our conference.
Yeah, that's spectacular. I mean, I think if you listen to everything that people have been talking about, it's really been encouraging for me to hear you guys key in on different stakeholders and like activating youth, activating housing advocates, activating the engineering community, activating safety advocates, because that is the real essence of the coalition that we're talking about. So bringing it back to the initial theme, the first part, you guys did a wonderful job, I think, talking about the small d democratic aspect of what you're engaged with, right? Which is essentially persuasion, right? You talked a lot about messaging. That's an American concept, right? Free speech. We go out, we're gonna argue, we're gonna persuade, we're gonna advocate, we're gonna message, and you all have found ways to do that. And then we've talked about the coalition aspect of acting local, right? This whole Brandeis idea of like it's happening. If the federal government can't figure it out, the national government's not going to be our answer. People need to join together at the local level in some sort of coalition, take action. For us to be successful as a people and a society. But the other aspect of this whole talk is the experimentation. Right, so I want to leave the kind of third round. I guess maybe have had like 5 rounds, but it's all right. We'll roll back the tape and work it out later. But this last question is kind of like, what are you guys working on now that's really got you excited, like in the kind of experimentation realm or doing something different in terms of a mousetrap? I'll start with Kirk, because you talked to me on our phone call, our very focused phone call, which I really appreciate. I'm not criticizing, man, not criticizing. You talked about one of the coolest, I think, ideas of taking the whole concept of mega projects like to a realm I hadn't even considered. Can you just pinpoint on that, because it's a really cool. I hope you're not insulted by calling it an experiment, because I think you're like beyond the experiment phase, but it's a really, really cool idea. So maybe you could use some of this time to get into that.
Thanks for teeing me up for this. But I think like many of the communities that you all live in, Washington State is facing a traffic safety crisis. We know that 2023 was the most dangerous year for people, or we had the most people who were killed or seriously injured on our streets than since 1990. And every single one of those is a tragedy. And we know where the most dangerous streets are in Washington State and in most of our communities. There are state-owned Main Street highways. And I'm certain if I asked you about this, you all would know the Main Street highway in your community. It's a Strode. It's a multi-lane arterial that was originally built to connect communities, but then those communities built up alongside them with homes, businesses, residences, apartments. Here in Portland, it's very similar to 82nd Street or Powell, these fast-moving streets that are also our busiest transit streets as well. In Washington State, these streets like Aurora, Division Street in Spokane, Pacific Avenue in Tacoma, Highway 2 in Monroe, they're our most dangerous streets. You're twice as likely to be hit or seriously injured on one of these streets. But they're also our busiest transit streets. They're where our busiest bus lines run. And we know that when our state we also know how to fix these streets. We know that with better sidewalks, more frequent crosswalks, median refuge islands, and better bus stops, we can make them better places to catch the bus and also make them better main streets for these communities. Because these streets are where Washington State is upzoning. They're adding so much more housing along these roadways. And we know that when our state puts its mind, money, and might to a problem, it can do big things. We have mega projects for floating bridges in the Seattle area. We have mega projects for freight to our ports. We're calling for a mega project for safety. We're calling for the same commitment that we bring to those priorities to these Main Street highways. And we called on the state legislature last legislative session for a $1.5 billion investment over 10 years into these roadways, matching what our former Washington State Department of Transportation Secretary Roger Millar had asked for. Last year, we were successful in getting $100 million for those roadways. And we know while that is $100 million more than what we had at the beginning of this year, it's just a drop in the bucket for what we need. And so we're going to go back to the legislature, calling for the state to take responsibility for these roadways and make them streets that these communities can be proud of.
Awesome. Yeah, that definitely deserves a round of applause. That was just an amazing thing that you shared with me when we talked. I wanted to make sure that we got that more broadly communicated. Sean, you also, just this month, have done something with a recent report that's, I would characterize as in the spirit of experimentation around transit-oriented development and real estate and thinking about your assets differently and kind of pushing into new ways of doing things. Your land report that you did around non-fare box revenue opportunities is, could you talk a bit about that? Because the scope of it is, I think, novel and super unique.
Sure. To Kirk's point, and we've tried to adopt some of what you've talked about on individual discrete projects, right? Because it's always, you do your traffic study, you come out with a report, and we're talking about level of service, D, F, all these low levels, and that's how you're measuring success. So we've moved on when we're looking at our TOD, and this is a no-brainer, obviously, when we're considering what improvements we're contemplating at an individual project. It's people first. Cars are toward the bottom. So I think that's a starting point, and I think it's fantastic that you're launching that initiative. That's something that New Jersey and other states should be considering as well. As it relates to the land plan that you mentioned, Leif, it's something we announced just in the last week or so, and this ties in with the work up in Massachusetts, the idea of being a little bit more proactive about demonstrating that TOD development centered around transportation facilities we're all just saying it's a good thing. We want to do more of this. And what New Jersey Transit is stating plainly to the state, to interested developers, host communities, legislature. I learned this morning there's a governor's race in New Jersey. Apparently, we're going to have a new governor next year. So whomever is the next governor, saying, hey, there's an opportunity in front of us to really accelerate what we're doing. We're very proud that the program that we run at present, is maybe delivering 400 to 500 housing units a year. Usually, 20% plus or minus are affordable units. We're saying we want to pick that up. We want to be getting to a place where it's more like 2,000 units a year. And so we've put this plan out on the street that just says where we have real estate interests, assets, whether it's surface parking lots, opportunities for advertising, industrial sites, wetland banking locations. We want to actively pursue those kinds of opportunities, for a lot of the reasons that we've been talking about through the course of this morning, to generate revenues for the agency, right? We're like most transit agencies, we're in the couch cushions, looking for monies to make sure we can keep service running and get our people to and from where they need to be. So demonstrating our commitment to generating revenues that we can put back into the system, but then also unlock all of the wonderful things that come with redevelopment, both in terms of the local economic activity and all the multiplier effects that are spurred on by redevelopment, all the jobs that are creative, the broader economic activity, the housing units, as I mentioned. So our hope and our intention is that by announcing the plan, that we can really work with, like folks to my right here in particular, and the legislature and the incoming administration to strategically, look at, what's on the books statute-wise, existing programs that we have. We've got a very strong transit village initiative where we directly support host municipalities that are interested in pursuing TOD at their their transit-based land assets. So planning support, resources, connecting to best practices, and adopting transit supportive land use plans and parking policies. So the hope is that it spurs conversation around these very things, that we can maybe refine existing legislation that's on the books. We've cited some of the work that you've been involved with, Andrew, up in Massachusetts. It's something as we can look to as a best practice. But we're excited to dive in and see where the conversation goes, and hopefully it better positions us, as proud as we are about projects like a Hoboken, a Metro Park, Red Bank, Somerville, and others. And I think everybody in the room knows it. We got to pick up the pace, right? We've got to pick up the pace. We don't have the luxury of moving slowly on these matters. The challenge is too real, too stark. It's a crisis. We need these housing units delivered. We need all the benefits that they fostered. We need them, realized. And so that's credit to transit leadership, the administration, to plainly stating it and say, hey, let's go. Time to get to work. We're happy to get into it.
No, that's great. I think the whole idea of thinking more broadly about your assets. Getting into energy and telecom and kind of environmental programs is. I do a lot of work for some of the best TOD agencies in the country, and for the most part, they're just kind of solely focused on mixed-use development, and I think that's great. And there's a lot of work to be done in that space, but actually kind of broadening out the aperture a bit, the way that you've done has been, I think, really creative and something that I hope others will take a look at and maybe consider with their programs. And on kind of following that point a little bit, Andrew, you made, I think, probably a facetious comment about working with real people in the past. Now you're, I don't know, working in artificial intelligence or something like that. I don't know, but you are probably cutting yourself a bit short because in my experience, having spent 20 years in the public sector and then working in the private sector, you draw on that public sector experience, right? And if you're public purpose, you're just public purpose. You don't even need to work in the government. Obviously, these people are demonstrating, through their, really noble careers and efforts that it takes all types of professions and disciplines and organizations to do good in the world, right? And HNTB's got a great, platform. So I hope you're getting a lot out of being able to kind of change your perspective. I have done that myself, and it really has helped me improve as an advisor and a support agent for the folks who are in that direct role in government. So the follow-up question to that is, from your position, are there examples either in Massachusetts or with other clients where you're seeing kind of the benefit of this experimentation, willingness to take some chances with a project or take some chances with an initiative that you might be able to share with the group here?
We're seeing it a lot, and I think what's interesting is that I spent years in a transit agency, and my heart sits in a transit agency, and I have a great respect for what these guys do. But what these guys do is really hard, and there are so many hurdles that prevent them from doing it just as fast as you want, right? We say, we have to go faster. The house is literally on fire, right? We have to go faster. But there's so many things that prevent you from going as fast as you want. Some of them are self-inflicted, I think. Some of them are external, and some of them are, I don't know, metaphysical. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So I think we're really trying to, we finally really working with clients to really think about what is it that prevents you from doing that thing that you love and you really want to do. Mega projects. Why do mega projects take so long? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but like let's think about that. And I think what's really interesting is one thing that I think agencies generally have changed about is they love data now. They're like all in. They have so much data and they love it, and they've started to say like, okay, let's try to use that in a smarter way. Like, what does that data actually tell us, and how can we use that to build a solution? So that idea of like, I own this thing that could be a problem solver for me if I just knew how to do it. So we're working with a lot of clients on that kind of stuff, but also helping them just to re-examine their processes to say, you really want to build that, Hoboken. What is it? What are all of the things that slow you down or stop you? And let's start building critical paths to overcome that. And I think that's a sea change difference. And certainly that's happening at the MBTA, but it wasn't happening at the MBTA when I started. And we're seeing it at agencies all over the place, really thinking about I think they're getting it more. The house really is on fire. We have to move faster. We have to move better. We have to move smarter. New money's not coming. So how do we do all this stuff with what we've got?
I can offer up some thoughts. It's a great point, and I think you're right that agencies they're just being forced to have these very real, honest conversations with themselves as far as how we can strategically deliver on some of these much-needed improvements. And I can offer at Hoboken one of the things that we've done that's different, I think a little bit different. It's maybe a little bit consistent with some of the joint development programs that are out there. There is a public component of the project where the state's investing approximately $200 million in the facility itself, historic preservation, restoration, a new bus terminal, raising Warrington Plaza, to guard against nuisance flooding. But it's a $200 million investment that the state is making. But instead of using what would typically be transit methodologies for delivering all those improvements, for us designing, us contracting, us overseeing all of the work, we're doing it with our private partner, Elcor in this case. So Elcor has been the designated developer there for 10, 15 plus years. But they are acting as our proxy for implementation of these much needed improvements. So you're de-risking the job in the sense that you're now compelling your partner to oversee this work, and you're freeing up capacity in the building, right, at transit itself. Right? We're facing challenges for delivery of just your day-to-day state of good repair and fixing bridges and all the things that are needed to keep service going. Like, the last thing we need to take on is direct oversight of this historic preservation project. So that is one creative thing that we're doing. It's working quite well. Elcor and our GC have been fantastic partners, and I would suggest that it's something that we'll see more of going forward.
And I should point out, you could also do that to scale, right? Like, Hoboken's a huge, massive project, but those same things happen on much smaller projects. That if you could apply that same sort of thinking, like, how do we get out of our own way to make that happen faster? So we talk about these mega things, Federal Way. I mean, that's bigger than I can put my head around. It doesn't always have to be for that kind of project.
Rachelle, do you have anything you want to highlight around this idea of taking chances, building a better mousetrap? Are there things you guys are keying in on that are kind of perspective in your view, where you can kind of harness the urgency of now?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that as my fellow panelists were talking very articulately about why things feel so urgent right now, and I think one thing as I was preparing for today I kept going back to was we in this industry have a lot of unknown unknowns, and so when you deal with large long runways for planning and funding, like we have in Phoenix with T2050. Once again, and I'll go back to some of my previous remarks, you get sort of stuck with society that has been very supportive of transit and has passed initiatives, and then once we get to the actual projects, have forgotten that they've supported these projects and voted on them, and that's where our education comes in. So we've been a steady drumbeat of information. We're going to continue to do that. One thing that has been very challenging is the biggest unknown, I think, that all of us experienced was the global pandemic. That honestly, through quite a lot of change into how things were done and are done now, including, public outreach, public meetings, adding in a new level of comfort with virtual participation. We were already seeing community outreach and engagement change really fundamentally. It's totally different than when I started, 12 years ago. And so all of these different things, these unknown unknowns, including project unknown unknowns. So anyone who's ever worked on, built a giant mega project or even a smaller project knows that there are just things that happen that slow things down. We've been lucky in Phoenix to be able to adapt to that. And so during the pandemic, what we did was we accelerated our street repaving and beautification projects that, weren't necessarily slated to take place, but could happen on an accelerated time frame because of the opportunity that, no one was on the roads. And in, that vein, there were a couple of other things that were able to be accelerated as well with some other projects. And so we were able to sort of add to that sense of urgency and really move some things along. Now we're in a place where I think the challenge is it feels really urgent, but most of the projects we have going are in the planning phase. And so there's this sort of perception that there's nothing going on, when in reality we've been, working and advocating toward these big initiatives that really, spelled the future of transportation in our region. Most recently Prop 479, which if it hadn't have passed, we didn't get it extended, it would have really crippled transportation for the entire metro area. It would have been devastating. And so we, through those initiatives and through that information, that steady drumbeat and being consistent, have been able to really, help people understand that, hey, it feels urgent right now. There's a lot on the horizon that is going to contribute to what you voted for, what you want, what you need, even though some of those projects have been delayed or changed in some way based on the unknown unknowns that have popped up in sort of as a barrier or a challenge as we've gone by.
Thank you, thank you. Now, these folks have more to give, okay? But it's not coming from me. So do you have any questions? There's a lot of knowledge up here. Yes, if you could go to the microphone, identify yourself however you'd like.
Thanks so much, everyone. My name's Thomas Moe. I'm board chair of the Street Trust, which is our local advocacy organization based here in Portland, kind of like our counterpart to Transportation Choices Coalition. I'm curious about, here in Portland, we've had some challenges engaging on transportation policy with the business community here. At Mpact, it's typically a lot around TOD, real estate development, but on certain parts of the city or the region in Portland, there are areas that are very auto-centric, and we've had some challenges with the business community that are really in this kind of auto-centric land use. How do you, work with business stakeholders in terms of figuring out there is a now kind of land use that is auto-centric, and then there's kind of like the ideal land use that is denser, mixed use? How do you, frame that in terms of the potential displacement? We talk about gentrification as more of a residential kind of thing, but it also happens with businesses.
Awesome question. You want to go?
I can start. As you were talking, I'm like, wow, let's unpack that. This is great. So I have found over the years that the business community, at least in the Phoenix Metro, has been very receptive to tying things solely to the ability to continue development, continue to bring in new people, which means more customers, more workers, more of everything, which is generally how, you know, capitalism works. And so what we've always leaned on is tailoring the message really specifically to each business that you're engaging with. So if we, you know, for example, were speaking with the Phoenix Suns, we would be talking about, hey, you know, you have a lot of employees that come in to work on a regular basis. Let's talk about how we get them from point A to point B. You have a lot of shift workers that come in for games. Let's talk about how we get them from point A to point B. You have people who are coming to your games that you want to be able to access your facility in downtown Phoenix. Let's talk about how we get them to your games. Now, let's also talk about the fact that you want your fan base to encompass the entire region and not just Phoenix and what is accessible by car. There's not enough parking, so transit should be a no-brainer for you. You know, there are all these different things that we use as part of our toolbox when going to different businesses. And honestly, sometimes the conversations happen over a long period of time. There are businesses that we've approached, you know, regardless of when or at what point. It could be proactive, it could be reactive to something, but they'll be totally against transit transportation. And eventually, after you know, a lot of hard conversations and a lot of work to help them understand how things can be beneficial, they'll eventually come around. Some don't, and that's just a reality that I think that we all live and work with on a regular basis. But for us, it's really been about carefully tailoring the message about what transportation means for their sort of constituency, their audience, their customers. That can really help move the needle, and that's where we found the best reception. And that starts, you know, from the beginning too. When folks are exploring our region, we talk about transportation as an asset and our planning process and our plans for the region. So that has become, you know, I think very woven into the fabric of how Arizona and Phoenix in general pitch, you know, businesses on moving into the area or coming to the area, particularly large businesses. And so I'll stop there. I could probably talk at length on.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so I know that your question was really about like going into an area where we're trying to build transit, but one thing that I've been working on with some of our clients that I'm really fascinated by is transit agencies don't always do the best job of messaging, like why are we building this or why do we even run this system? So we've been helping some clients really think about that question of like, well, what does transit really mean for this city? And basically the question is, what happens if you didn't have this transit, right? And so our clients in Washington, D.C. and New York have really been having us to calculate or quantify, like, you say there's an environmental benefit, well, what is it? Like, so we've been working with them to calculate that. And then we're doing this on a regional level, right? We're not doing it on a corridor-based level. We're doing it on a regional level. And it's been, for them, it's been a tool for them to say, like, Washington, D.C., better than the other. You know, they need to go get more money. They need more money. And so they need to sell why they need more money. And so that ability to quantify what their benefits really are and to show what happens if you don't have the system. And one of the things we always point to is things like New York, New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy, where it became pretty clear what happens to a region when you don't have transit for a month. I don't know what it's like for you guys, but, you know, it's stark. And I mean, that was an extreme situation, but really helping transit agencies and communities say like, well, what does it mean? Like, what is the value to my community? And learning to quantify it on a level that people get. It's been some interesting work.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing to that. So when we were working on Prop 479, there was a real risk that if this did not get passed and our, you know, regional tax went away, that our transit system would be fundamentally changed for years and years. You all know the planning runway for some of these projects, and I don't need to tell you that interrupting a huge funding stream would be catastrophic. As we were sort of helping people understand the information, what we said was, hey, it'd be great if we had a visual for this. And so in partnership with MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments, our regional MPO and COG, we put together this map that showed all of transit across the region, and then we took away everything that would go away if Prop 479 didn't pass. And it was like, people would be like, the air would suck out of the room, basically. And so just with that visual, we were able to go in, and anyone who didn't understand, anything about Prop 479 would go, oh, that's a problem. And so I think, when you can start to get really tailored like that and you start to understand what moves the needle for people and, what transit means, what it means if it's not there, it can be really impactful to your messaging.
Nice. I love the Ross Perot reference. This could be our last question. How much more time do we have? 25, 30, 40 minutes? No, I think we have like 2 minutes.
Okay. It just really spoke to me what you said, showing people what you don't have, because I recently moved to Pittsburgh a year and a half ago doing the bus network redesign for PRT. And just within the past year and a half, we went out with the first draft and showed everybody what we could be, right? And then the state funding crisis. Pennsylvania is one of the states in a transit funding crisis right now. So we actually had to pivot and show the people of Pittsburgh, here's what would happen if we had to cut 35% of our transit. So now we are pivoting back away from the transit funding crisis, and we're going to show the public the second draft of bus network redesign. And I'm at a point where, how do you message this to the public? We showed you what we could be, what we wouldn't be, and now we're showing you our second. It's just whiplash, and it's just jarring for the public. And I'm so grateful for this conversation, because it's, how do I build the messaging? How do I bring people on board and bring with us, keep the momentum of this is what we could be? And I guess my question is, how do you message this stuff in uncertain times? And how do you keep bringing people with you when you're kind of giving them a little bit of whiplash back and forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will go back to something that we've used as a standard always. And I think it sounds really simple. And I'm not trying to be cute about it, but you tell the truth. You're honest in what you're putting out there. And I have found that 99% of the time, people expect the amenities of transit to be available for them when they live in a large metro area, and they expect to have these services, and anything that you're saying related to transit, they already expect to have it. And so typically it's fairly easy to get folks to resonate around the truth. The other piece of this is there are probably a lot of myths that you deal with related to transit as well. And so being able to identify what those myths are and what people are worried about or concerned about as part of what you're trying to push is really important as well, because you need to understand where your opposition is coming from and seek to meet them with how you are saying those truths that you're putting out about what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say from the advocacy side, it's how you amplify those human stories, because this is people missing doctor's appointments. It's people not being able to see their friends. It's a charge from being able to, or picking up your child from childcare late. I mean, these are really human stories of what this cost means. On the agency side, I think there's a lot more that agencies can do around strategic communications and really pushing a narrative of what this would mean. And I think we've seen agencies like the MTA in New York City do that around congestion pricing, what this would mean if this didn't move forward. I think we did see agencies like SEPTA do that really well with the Pennsylvania, the transit funding cuts. And I think, one, it was, I think, really powerful to walk down Division Avenue and see on the FX signs, the signs that said service cuts, like learn more about these. I think TriMet could be even more pointed to be like, this bus might only run like every 30 minutes, like if you don't speak up. Like agencies can really hammer home what service cuts will mean to riders. And you have that relationship, you have that megaphone, and agencies can really, I think, take more advantage of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I mean they've done as practitioners they're kind of, I think, giving you very good advice. My take on that is that we're in a democratic society, right? And so you have to advocate, and sometimes you have to play offense, and sometimes you have to play defense. And I get the whole whipsawing around, and maybe, I mean, Kirk, just like, maybe it's your margins when you're trying to stop something are probably a little tighter than when you're pushing to get something, getting people to vote for something. Just we can get into the data later and confirm my comment, or disabuse the fiction I just advanced. But I think you got to be able to go, play both ways. Look at Mecklenburg County. I mean, there's a lot of places right now, they're in the fight for investment in transit. And in Charlotte, they're pushing for a really big referendum, and they're selling the 4, right? They're selling the 4. And WMATA just did a whole Better Bus initiative that they sold that to our metro community, and it's worked out great because they're selling quality, service quality, better headways, better service, better connectivity. So I agree with all the comments. Agencies can do a better job with the selling, but unfortunately, you got to be able to toggle between offense and defense, right? It's just the world that we live in. So hopefully we've gotten some good takeaways here. We're at noon. I don't want to go over. Tessa, are we? They're gonna clip the mics in a second.
They're going to play the music pretty soon.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much for staying engaged, asking great questions. Our panelists are available if you want to just talk to them later, or buy them a cup of coffee, or meet them on a mobile workshop. Get out and see this wonderful city. And again, thanks to the host. Well done, Portland.